Beneath the facade of a happy family, dark secrets fester. Chuck's life is shattered when his wife, Marcy, confesses to an affair with Andy at their anniversary party, fueled by a sinister plot with their daughter, Rebecca. The fallout is brutal. Chuck leaves home, but not before discovering a diary detailing their plans. He confronts Andy in a bloody showdown, barely escaping with his life. Marcy's stalking turns violent, leading to a chilling confrontation involving a hidden weapon. Rebecca's karma hits hard when she discovers her husband's secret double life and criminal activities. This story dives deep into betrayal, vengeance, and the struggle to rebuild. Watch as we piece together a life torn apart by deceit. In 1986, Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States. The country had endured the hardships of the Carter administration and the aftermath of the Vietnam War. Times were tough, with gasoline rationing and inflation hitting hard. There were no cell phones, the internet, or digital devices. People still used cassettes, and CDs were just becoming popular. VHS and Beta were competing for the home video market, and video cameras were expensive and bulky. Computers were mostly for business use, with the IBM PC being the most popular. The Apple II was a leader in its class, and the Commodore 64 was the best gaming console. Video rental stores were starting to open, but you needed a membership to rent anything. If you lived in a rural area, TV was limited to a few over-the-air channels, often requiring a large antenna. Long-distance calls were costly, even for short distances. Charles, known as Chuck Newmeyer, sat in an unfamiliar bar, staring into his glass. He had been drinking bourbon and couldn't remember the last time he was this drunk. On this particular day, the amber color of the bourbon captivated him. He decided it might become his new favorite color, replacing the red his wife Marcy preferred. Chuck raised the glass to the light, taking his 8th or 9th shot, not caring anymore. He just wanted to forget everything. The bartender poured him another drink, and Chuck, lost in his thoughts, remembered his past. Chuck was born nearby and grew up in Crockett Villa. He left only briefly to get a degree in construction before returning to work for his old family friend, Billy Chase, who owned Chase Construction. Chuck had done all kinds of work, from concrete to bricklaying and even plumbing. In tough times, they took on small jobs to stay afloat, building sheds and farm buildings. Now Chuck was the project manager, handling crews, assignments, and schedules. He was 5'9" inches and weighed 186 pounds, toughened by years in construction. Respect was crucial in his line of work, and sometimes he had to be the toughest guy around. In 1986, the construction industry was struggling again. Work was scarce, and times were hard. Marcy, Chuck's wife, was his rock. She was a couple of years younger than Chuck, at 48, and though she had gained some weight, Chuck didn't mind. They had been together since high school, dating since 8th grade. Their relationship hit a rough patch a few weeks before prom in Chuck's senior year. They had planned to go together, but Marcy wanted to date someone else for a while, which shocked Chuck. Back in high school, Chuck was one of the few guys with his own car, an old Oldsmobile. He and Marcy had shared many memories in that car, but now, Chuck found himself in a bar, trying to drown his sorrows and forget the pain. It was a big Oldsmobile that Chuck bought for a couple of $100, which was a lot of money back then. He and his dad fixed up the engine until it ran smoothly. The car had a powerful engine that could make the heavy vehicle go up to 80 miles per hour. Marcy loved sitting next to Chuck in the front seat. People joked that it took 2 people to drive the car because it was so big. It had enough space for their friends and became the party car for trips to the river in summer, for ice skating in winter, for games, dances, movies, and anything else they wanted to do. Chuck and Marcy were always seen together, except when Chuck worked on his uncle's farm a few miles away. Chuck met Marcy in the school cafeteria for their usual lunch. "Marcy, I know we've been together from the start, but I don't want you to think I take you for granted. Will you go to prom with me this year?" Chuck asked with a smile. They had been talking about his senior prom for a while, and even discussed getting a motel room to take their relationship to the next level, which was a big deal. Marcy looked up at Chuck and said, "Sorry, but you're a bit late. Jimmy Willis asked me to his graduation, and I said yes. I love you, but I've never dated anyone else. I need to spread my wings a little." Everyone around them fell silent, shocked by her words. Chuck was stunned and felt sick. He didn't realize how loud he was until his friends later told him, "Why are you doing this now? We planned prom and everything, don't you remember? We're supposed to get married after you graduate. I'll wait for you," Chuck said, his voice shaky. Marcy seemed ready for his questions. "We've never dated anyone else. I want to see what else is out there. You're graduating and I'll still be here for 2 more years. Jimmy can keep me company while you're away. Besides, Jimmy is the senior quarterback and you're just a linebacker. He could be prom king, and I want to be prom queen with him." Chuck was lost. His best friend, girlfriend, and future wife sat there like a stranger. They had grown up together, shared their first kisses, and never been apart until now. In front of everyone, Chuck felt defeated. "If you're making these plans, I think you should return my sweater and my ring," he said, taking off the chain and putting it on the table. "Wait a minute. I'm not breaking up with you. We're still together." "We even have a date on Friday night," Marcy protested. "No, we're not. Keep the sweater and the ring. I won't wear them because they mean nothing now," Chuck replied, leaving the cafeteria and heading to his car. He sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Chuck went to the farm and chopped wood to vent his frustration and anger. He couldn't let anyone see how much he was hurting. He hoped Marcy would regret her decision by graduation. That night, his mother told him Marcy had called, but he shrugged and went to his room. Later, his mom asked what was wrong, and Chuck told her everything. She tried to get Chuck to talk to Marcy, but he refused. The next day at school, Chuck felt even more alone. He missed Marcy's presence in the car. 3 girls, all friends of Marcy, asked him to prom, but he wasn't interested. Chuck thanked the girls and said he would let them know later. One of his friends came up, patted him on the back, and pulled him towards a group of classmates who wanted to beat up Jimmy Willis, even though he was the quarterback. Chuck convinced them to leave Jimmy alone. He realized Marcy had made her choice, and Jimmy just took advantage of her wanting to try new things sooner than expected. Chuck had already figured out weeks earlier that Marcy might date others while he was in college. Just before classes started, Marcy caught up with him. She was angry. "What's wrong with you, Chuck? My mom had to take me to school this morning and scolded me for leaving you. I'm not leaving you, fool. It's just one date, not a breakup. Why do you think I'm leaving you for Jimmy Willis?" she said, grabbing his shirt and trying to hit him. Chuck blocked her hand. "What did you expect? Dropping this on me weeks before graduation? Prom is the biggest dance of the year. This is my last prom since I'm going to college. You'll have 2 more chances. You can go with anyone you want. Remember, we made plans not only for prom, but for after. We discussed this for years. Now you're going with Jimmy, and as far as I know, you'll be with him after the dance. When you told me you were going to prom with him, it ended our relationship. You left me. You'll have to face the consequences. I hope you don't get another date all year, including summer. By the way, 3 girls asked me to their prom this morning. Maybe more will ask later," Chuck said. He let go of her hand. "I was raised not to hit a woman, but I was also taught not to let a woman hit me. Try it again, and I might forget what I was taught," he warned. He turned away, leaving her crying. He went to class and sat with his friends, avoiding the girls who were eager to know all the details. Chuck saw Jimmy approach Marcy and tell her he wouldn't take her to prom because all the girls called him a jerk. Chuck went to prom with a cheerleader named Jenny. It was nice, but not what he wanted. Marcy also went to prom, but had to ask her cousin to take her. No one wanted to sit with them, and the other girls told Marcy what they thought of her in the restroom. Chuck stayed strong all summer after graduation. Marcy kept trying to win him back, but he only acknowledged her at group events their parents insisted on. He didn't ask her out anymore. That fall, after working on the farm all summer, he went to a college 100 miles away. The gravel roads made travel tough, taking him half a day to reach the city where the school was. He planned to come home only during holidays. He studied construction technology at the 2-year college. Chuck came home for Christmas and spring break, but did an internship with a large construction company during summer break, returning home only for Memorial Day, the 4th of July, and Labor Day. Each time he was home, Marcy tried to talk to him. She was lonely because no guys asked her out, except those who thought she was easy. Her parents told the other girls to avoid her because she was spoiled. Despite this, Marcy hadn't been with anyone, but how could she prove it? Chuck was polite but distant. He dated several girls in college but didn't take any relationship seriously. He might have had his first sexual experience, but Marcy's betrayal still hurt, and he still loved her. That's why he kept his distance. The next year was much the same. After graduation, Chuck accepted a job offer from Chase Construction. Marcy finally overcame the gossip. Jimmy Willis returned and dated her during her senior year. They went to prom together, even though he had already graduated. Jimmy didn't go to college because his dad owned a Chevrolet dealership, giving him a job without needing a degree. Chuck moved into a small apartment in Crockett Village and rarely saw Marcy. He dated different women but never felt the same connection he had with Marcy. He knew he needed to move on but wasn't in a hurry. After high school, Marcy enrolled in a local secretarial school. After finishing all these courses, Marcy decided to take an office management course. It took 2 years. During this time, Chuck would meet Marcy at a local grocery store or department store. Now he could stand and talk to her for a while. At first, they talked about people they both knew who were still in town. Later, their conversations became more personal, with comments like, "Do you remember when we—" Marcy had plans that Chuck didn't realize for a while. She used these casual conversations to remind him of the good times they shared together as friends. If he started looking at those memories without bitterness, maybe they could get back to what she wanted all along. She never wanted him to leave her, just to give her some freedom. However, she was very jealous of any woman who even looked at him. This double standard became clear years later. Now, as Chuck sat at the bar and thought about his past with Marcy, he could see how she carefully manipulated him into doing what she wanted. He didn't regret it because he wanted to be manipulated many times. He drank another shot and motioned for another. When he was served, he stared into the puddle of bourbon and continued to sort through his memories. He remembered how he finally asked her out again. They went to the movies and then to a cafe for coffee. They talked about the film and its meaning. Then they laughed, remembering how their English teacher tried to get them to do the same thing with books and movies in high school. But it never made sense then. They had a great time. Chuck could almost believe that Marcy was still the same schoolgirl when she hurt him. They made new plans to go out. Soon they became a successful couple again. It was 1960 and the new decade looked promising. World War II and Korea were just plots for films, competing with romantic comedies, westerns, and musicals. Most films were now in full color and stereo sound, very different from the small black and white TV screens with tiny speakers. As they grew closer as a couple, they began staying home more often. They made new friends and had card nights, played charades, and sometimes even a board game. Chuck eventually asked Marcy to marry him, and she immediately agreed. Their physical relationship also developed. There was no sex education in schools at that time. Sex was a serious subject and not talked about lightly. There were magazines, but nothing else except comics for education. This topic wasn't discussed in polite society. Mothers told their daughters it was their duty to submit to their husbands, and that sex before marriage made a girl a woman of easy virtue. So the couple knew no more about sex than street gossip. The lucky ones had an older person to teach and guide them, but most, like Marcy and Chuck, simply struggled to cope. They had no education or experience that could help them in the bedroom. But preparing for their wedding was different. Chuck found a lot on the outskirts of town, and they designed a house they could afford. It was a simple ranch-style home with a basement. However, Chuck saw the basement as potential living space rather than storage. He planned larger windows and higher ceilings. He also opted for a new thing called central air conditioning. When construction began, he helped at every stage. He helped prepare the site and dig the basement, forming the floor and foundations. Then the concrete was poured. After it hardened, the blocks began to be laid. Chuck would come in the evening after a full day at other jobs to lay a row or two of blocks as his contribution to the house. He helped with the floor, then the walls. Every part of the house received something from him. He even helped lay pipes for bathtubs, sinks, and toilets. He completed the final decorations a few days before the wedding. They planned to go on a short honeymoon for a week at a large resort in the mountains before moving into their new home together. Chuck never asked Marcy what happened at her bachelorette party, but he was a little embarrassed. The construction workers threw him a party. There was a huge amount of beer and adult films. Everyone with an 8mm projector and black and white film brought it to the rented hall for the party. They set up a large screen, and Chuck was seated in a place of honor directly in front of it, slightly to the side of the projector. He was then exposed to a variety of short films of various sexual acts, ranging from 3 to 5 minutes long. Chuck woke up the next morning with a huge hangover. He was lying on the sofa in the living room, and it seemed like most of the others were in the same condition. As they slowly tried to come back to life, everyone agreed that it had been one wild party. Chuck would admit only to himself that the education factor in the films was the most sexual education he had ever received. The films were too short to show any action that would really help. Their wedding took place with minor troubles. Extended families came from all over. Both mothers were delighted that the couple had overcome their early misstep and were now married. Their wedding night was the highlight of their courtship. In the newlyweds' room, they found a round bed, walls covered in red velvet, pink champagne, and chocolate-covered strawberries. They both tried the treats and discussed the decor. Chuck took off his belt and untied his tie. Marcy wanted to quickly get rid of her dress and disappeared into the bathroom to change. When she returned, she was wearing a new nightie. She told Chuck it was a bridal shower gift from her mother and mother-in-law. It was stunning. The nightie both hid and showed off her body at the same time. Chuck was familiar with her body and clothes, but this was something new and exciting. She still looked like the girl next door. Her breasts were full, and her waist was slim. She had a wonderful smile, though a little shy since she had never worn such revealing clothes before. She was critical of herself and didn't see how beautiful she was, only noticing things she wanted to change. Chuck looked at her and thought she was more stunning than anyone in the movies, and she was his wife. He approached her and kissed her. He told her how much he loved her. She said she loved him more. They both smiled. They made love for the first time. Later, when she left the bathroom, she found herself under bright lights and realized there wasn't much romance in the bridal suite that night. She turned off the light and soon fell asleep next to her new husband. The rest of the honeymoon was great, except for the sex. Chuck didn't know how to be gentle with his wife, and she didn't know how to tell him. They didn't talk much about it. This lack of communication set the tone for the years to come. These were exciting times. They married in 1961. Their daughter, Rebecca, known as Becky, was born in 1963. They got through the president's death. Marcy cried all night and during his funeral. In 1965, they had a son named John. He was a beautiful baby loved by everyone. Then came a day of horror and grief. One morning, when John was 6 months old, he was found lifeless in his crib. Marcy was devastated. Chuck felt he had to be strong and not show how broken he was. He was the rock everyone relied on. He had to explain to his 2-year-old daughter why her little brother was no longer there. Doctors couldn't explain why John died. They called it crib death. They had no other explanation and didn't want to talk about it. Marcy wondered if she was to blame. Chuck thought maybe they should have taken John to the doctor more often. Marcy wondered why Chuck didn't seem as upset as she was. He even went back to work a couple of days after the funeral, leaving her alone to take care of Becky. She returned to work a few weeks later. The family kept asking what happened, but nobody knew the answers. On the day of John's death, the police responded to an emergency call. There was no 911 service back then. You had to dial 0 and ask to be connected to emergency services. The cops seemed to think Chuck and Marcy did something wrong, but they couldn't prove anything. Even years later, whenever they had contact with law enforcement, the officers would check something and suddenly become aggressive. Chuck could now look back on that incident and see that something had changed. Marcy wanted sex less and less. She never initiated it between them. After John died, she seemed to resist Chuck's attempts more often. It soon became a heavy sigh whenever he tried to cuddle with her. They no longer touched each other lovingly. They still had parties and invited friends over as often as before. They had friends with children and would have nights out, barbecues, or card parties. Their small town avoided the worst of the race riots that hit bigger cities, but they had to change their thinking. Though they were not openly prejudiced, they remembered telling offensive jokes and felt ashamed of it. Then came the disaster called Vietnam. Friends went there and died. Even those who survived were changed forever. People treated them badly. We landed on the moon. It was a great moment in history. The space module burned down on the launch pad earlier, and another one almost didn't return. But 3 crew members returned home safe and sound. Russians and Americans met in space and shook hands. The president resigned in disgrace. Inflation was high and unemployment was too. Free love was the slogan for the younger generation. Chuck had a hard time understanding them. Illegal drugs were now common, though still illegal. A new birth control method, the pill, became popular. Women could now have sex with multiple partners without worrying about unplanned pregnancies. With medical help, even unplanned pregnancies could be taken care of. Chuck felt more and more disconnected from the modern world. Their daughter was getting ready for high school, and puberty was near. He was always by her side. He went to her school events. She had been baptized in church and was now ready for confirmation classes. She was active in sports all year round. She was a beautiful girl, almost a teenager. Cosmopolitan magazine published a list of the best sex positions. Marcy read them all but never discussed her desires with Chuck. She read best-selling books about sex but never talked about her needs, desires, or dreams with her husband. Now there was an adult movie theater in the city center instead of a regular theater, but good, decent people didn't go to such places. There was even an adult store next to the cinema. Again, this was a place where decent people didn't go. Marcy gained some weight during her pregnancy, but neither Chuck nor Marcy worried about it. Chuck still loved her as much as ever. She was still the girl he fell in love with. Chuck had also gained a few pounds, but his job was very physical, so he stayed in good shape. Marcy was now a personal assistant in Pennsylvania to her boss. This started as just a secretarial job, but later it became very important in the business world. Both made good money. Chuck still earned most of the income, but Marcy's contribution was significant. Their house was almost fully paid off and would be before Becky graduated from high school. They were saving money for her education, hoping she would get grants and scholarships because she wanted to become a doctor. They were proud of their daughter and still deeply grieved for John. They avoided comparing themselves to their neighbors. They didn't feel the need to change houses every few years like some of their peers. Their mortgage payments were low, which helped during high inflation years. Their cars were paid for and still ran well. When Becky was about to graduate from high school, they bought a camper and went on trips every summer. Chuck and Marcy also avoided common pitfalls that many couples fall into. Most of their peers fell into 2 main groups. One group sought out extramarital pleasures, while the other stayed home, watched TV, and slowly faded away. Chuck and Marcy continued to go out to dinner, movies, dances, and visit other couples. They discussed current events, their jobs, and Becky's activities. Chuck told Marcy he loved her every morning when they left for work, and every night before they went to sleep. Marcy always repeated these words. Becky graduated with honors and attended a 4-year college to earn her bachelor's degree, working at a nursing home to make money. She was a wonderful young woman. She dated a few guys in school but wasn't ready for a serious relationship. Her parents suggested she might be after medical school. Chuck felt no pain as he thought about his early years with Marcy and Becky. The year Becky graduated from high school, they quietly celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They focused more on her achievements. Each year, they celebrated their anniversary with dinner at a nice restaurant. Gifts for each other were thoughtful and lovingly chosen. Even though Chuck had his own secretary, he never let her choose a gift for Marcy. This wasn't like Marcy's boss, who wanted Marcy to choose all his gifts. Now, Becky had graduated from college with a pre-med degree and was waiting for her placement letter. Since it was her parents' 25th anniversary, she planned a big celebration. Many of their old friends had never reached 25 years of marriage, making this celebration even more special. They beat the odds and still loved each other. Chuck paused his thoughts and drank more. It was becoming very difficult for him to concentrate on recent events. These events caused him the greatest pain. Not since John had died, even with the deaths of his parents, had he felt so alone or in such deep pain. Chuck suddenly needed to leave the bar. He felt stuffy. He needed fresh air before he threw up. He stumbled as he reached the door, almost falling. "No, not here," he screamed in his head. "I need to get out. I need to be alone. I can't break down here." He managed to open the heavy door. It didn't seem so heavy when he walked in. He staggered away from the bar and the parking lot light. There was darkness, Blessed darkness. It matched the darkness in his soul. No matter how drunk he was, he couldn't stop thinking about the celebration. It was planned for their anniversary. Becky was very persistent about this. Since it fell on a Saturday, it seemed like fate. All their friends and remaining family could attend. The party started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and was supposed to last a few hours. Becky decided to serve light appetizers along with a big cake. There would also be beer and liquor for those who wanted to drink. After all, it was a celebration. Marcy started the day with a few drinks while still at home. She was in a festive mood. By the time the party started, she was already drunk and greeted people warmly. There was her boss and his current wife, Billy Chase, and his wife in a wheelchair. Many of Chuck and Marcy's co-workers and people from their church were there. It was nice to see so many people speaking highly of this couple. Becky brought old photo albums and laid out photos of the happy couple for everyone to see. There were pictures of her from infancy to adulthood and several of John. Almost everyone knew about their loss. It was never a secret, so no questions were asked about the children's photos. There was an open microphone for people to come up and talk about funny and sometimes awkward moments in the couple's life. No one mentioned Chuck's graduation party. Even Becky had never heard of her mother's big mistake. As Chuck walked, or rather stumbled, along the poorly maintained sidewalk, he failed to notice there were no buildings around. It was dark, and that comforted him. He fell several times, but got up each time. Alcohol was clouding his mind. What day is it? Is it Sunday already? Is this the end of his hell? Chuck continued to walk and remember. At the end of the party, Marcy and Chuck were invited onto the stage. Chuck only said a few words. He thanked everyone for coming and thanked Becky for organizing the event. He then turned to Marcy. Marcy, you are the only love of my life. Without you, I am not complete. In fact, without you and Becky, I would be just a shell of a man, Chuck said. He raised a toast to everyone and drank the last glass of champagne. Marcy stood up. She was unsteady on her feet, but the microphone picked up her words clearly. She stuttered a bit before whispering, "What nonsense! Talking so much crap about a man who thinks he's a great lover? Andy should be here instead. He knows how and what to do with me." She slowly sat back in her chair. The whole hall froze. Everyone who knew them looked at the man sitting at the end of the hall, Andy. Actually, Andrew Corning tried to look as inconspicuous as possible. One of the women sitting next to him stood up and slapped him. "You're a bastard," she said and walked away. Becky was on her way to her mother when she heard those terrible words. She stopped at the edge of the stage and began to cry. Chuck was stunned at first. He completely ignored what he heard. There was no sign that Marcy was thinking about anyone else, let alone having a physical relationship. Chuck sat down at a table away from his wife. People blushed with shame, suddenly finding they had business elsewhere. Marcy's boss shook his head at his assistant. There would be a showdown on Monday. He looked at Mr. Corning. Yes, there would be a showdown on Monday. Billy Chase walked up to Chuck. He said something, but it didn't reach Chuck. He was still trying to understand what had just happened in his life. He was happy a moment ago. He didn't know when he would be happy again. Billy gave up and took his wife to their car. He'd talk to Chuck later. Becky finally pulled herself together, blew her nose, and went to her mother, who was now in a state of oblivion. Marcy rarely drank, and she would pay for today in many ways. Becky looked at her father. He sat in a daze but seemed physically okay. She asked some of her cousins for help, and they picked up their aunt and carried her to the car. The look on their faces made Becky think they wished they had put her under the car instead of inside. All the relatives believed Chuck was a great guy and didn't deserve such humiliation. The rest of the family helped clean up the remains of the party and tried to give Chuck space. They saw him get up and go to the restroom, but didn't see him leave through the emergency exit next to it. Chuck got into his car and drove to the nearest diner. Chuck, with tears in his eyes, continued to stumble along the unfamiliar sidewalk. He kept replaying Marcy's confession in his head, her preference for her lover over her husband. Chuck always thought he was a good man, a good father, a good husband, and maybe an adequate lover. Without feedback from his only lover, his wife, how could he improve or change? Was he that bad? If so, what about being a normal person, a father, a loving husband? Damn, what is the meaning of his life? Then he fell again and didn't get up for a long time. He didn't know where he was and frankly didn't care. He finally sat up as headlights illuminated him. It was a city policeman on patrol. The officer stopped and asked Chuck if he needed help. Chuck didn't answer. Backup was called, and several more officers arrived. Within minutes, the first officer began to examine Chuck. He smelled like old alcohol. His clothes were of good quality but dirty and torn from falls. There were abrasions on his face and arms from falling and trying to get up. Additional officers secured the scene and searched for the cause of the victim's appearance. Chuck wasn't very good at answering questions. He was confused. His head felt like cotton wool. He couldn't concentrate on the policemen, and they kept asking questions, not giving him time to answer. The city didn't have an ordinance against public drunkenness, and the jail no longer had a drunk cell, so officers had limited options. They found Chuck's driver's license after a brief struggle to get to his wallet. He was at least 2 miles from his home address. They asked dispatch to call his home, but no one answered. What they didn't know was that Becky took her mother home, put her to bed, and then went looking for Chuck. Marcy was too drunk to answer the phone, so the call went unanswered. Since no one answered at the home address, the police had no choice but to call an ambulance. The ambulance arrived within 5 minutes. The tired paramedics weren't impressed by yet another drunk on their shift. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and they had only slept an hour between calls. They quickly picked Chuck up and loaded him into the back of the ambulance. Chuck kept saying that his wife didn't love him. When asked about the pain, he simply muttered about his broken heart. When asked about the abrasions, he looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, then shrugged. They might hurt later, but his depression was a bigger problem. They went to the hospital where Chuck was born 50 years ago. On the way, the medic asked Chuck again what happened to make him so far from his home. When he named the bar where he was, the medic was surprised since Chuck was found almost a mile from the bar and far from his home. On the way to the hospital, Chuck asked the young doctor if he was married. The doctor answered yes. Chuck asked if his wife loved him. The doctor answered yes. Chuck started laughing. "That doesn't mean she loves you. I also have 2 children, and my wife doesn't love me enough to be satisfied with sex with me." The doctor was shocked by this statement. He clearly didn't understand. Chuck went on to explain that his wife never loved him enough to be comfortable in bed with him. He repeated this all the way to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors escorted Chuck to the emergency room and laid him on a bed. He closed his eyes because of the bright light. He wanted darkness again. He heard one of the doctors explaining what had happened. It was close enough to the truth that Chuck didn't feel the need to explain again. He tried to sleep, but soon a nurse began taking his pulse and blood pressure and then spoke to the doctor. The doctor asked him about the events, and he repeated his story, but this time he began to cry. He didn't know if he was sober, but he couldn't explain better that his wife didn't love him. The nurse cleaned his abrasions and applied bandages. She said they tried to contact his family, but no one responded. Chuck simply nodded. More proof that Marcy doesn't love him. She's probably with that bastard Andy. He couldn't remember the last name. Then they dimmed the lights and left the room. Chuck fell asleep for a while. He woke up when he felt movement in the room. It was still dark, but he could see the silhouette of the nurse who came to check on him. His head was a little clearer, but it hurt. After the nurse left, he sat up. He needed to leave. If Becky was worried, she would check the hospital at some point. He didn't want to see anyone he knew for a while. He was too humiliated to even look his daughter in the eyes. He certainly didn't want to see Marcy. All the feelings he felt when she dumped him before prom came back. She wanted someone else but didn't want to let him go. Well, she can take her boyfriend. He couldn't be older than 30. He was better suited to Becky's age. Young and tanned, his hair was bleached like a surfer's, even though they lived hundreds of miles from any ocean. Chuck looked out the door. There was no one in the corridor, so he quickly headed toward the exit and soon found himself on the street. It was still dark, but there was light in the east. The sun would soon rise, and the darkness he craved would be gone for a few hours. He needed to find darkness and curl up and hide for a while. Chuck walked down the sidewalk toward the street, and luckily a taxi passed by. He didn't know the address of the bar where he left his car, but he remembered the name, and the taxi driver knew it well. 15 minutes later, he was standing next to his car in the parking lot of a closed bar. As he was about to get into the car, he saw a familiar car driving past on the street. Becky couldn't see her father or his car. Chuck waited until she had driven past before opening the door and driving away. He soon left the city. The capital was only 2 hours away, and he could get there and hide for a while. He needed more alcohol and a place to stay. Soon the sun was fully up, but he was on the outskirts of the city. He found a motel next to a bar and parked. He wasn't completely sober, but he was too sober for what he wanted. Nearby, there was a store selling alcohol. He didn't even have to talk to people. He could just grab a bottle of his new favorite color and stay inside in the dark. He did just that. He bought enough and paid in cash so he wouldn't be bothered for a week. He drank, fell, vomited, woke up, drank, fell, vomited, woke up, and repeated this until the alcohol ran out and he had no strength to go to the store again. He was still wearing the same clothes he wore to the party. He smelled terrible, even to himself. Vomit was everywhere in the room, on the walls, the bed, the floor, the shower floor, and the curtain, everywhere except the toilet. God, it smelled so bad that his stomach kept churning. He got up from the floor on the last day and got into the shower. He slowly straightened up and began to take off his clothes as the water flowed. He had no plan for the future other than to return to work. The only thoughts about his wife were about making her suffer the way she made him. Right now, he didn't know how to take revenge. She got her lover. Hell, he's probably lying in her bed right now. After all, she doesn't need Chuck anymore. She made that clear on their silver anniversary. He needed a place to stay. He certainly had no intention of returning to the house he had built for her while she lived there. Maybe she'll move in with Andrew, the god of love. No, she's not that considerate. With the house paid off, she could handle the cost with her salary. He actually built it for her. No, she will believe that she deserves the house and everything in it. Hell, she might not even give him his own clothes. She can keep them out of spite. After taking off his clothes and trying to wash them with a small bar of soap, he rinsed them off and stepped out of the shower. He hung things up to dry and tried to clean up some of the vomit. He threw the bottles into or near the trash can. Since it was full, he opened the windows to let in fresh air. He reminded himself to tip the cleaners when they came to clean, as it would be a terrible job. A few hours later, his underwear, pants, and shirt were dry enough to wear. He went out and found a cafe where he ate and a cheap clothing store where he bought new clothes. He was surprised when he returned to his room and found that the staff had already left. When he checked, he saw they had also brought a new mattress. Their tips were growing by the minute. He checked his money and found that he had a couple of $100 left in cash, as well as a credit card that he rarely used. He'd probably have to use it to pay this bill since he was already on his feet. He called his boss at home. Billy was glad to hear him and didn't seem too upset that Chuck missed a week of work. "Listen, son, I kind of understand what you're going through. Before you came to work for me, Millie had an affair. She was damn attractive back then, and she knew it. It was hard for me, but she finally came to her senses when I got drunk and disappeared for a whole month. She was so afraid that I might do something to myself that she realized what a fool she was. She finally got back to normal, and we've been pretty good ever since." Billy paused. "Have you called home yet?" Chuck was honest. "Right now, I don't have a home. If you mean, did I call Marcy, then no, I have no reason to talk to her." Billy didn't try to convince him. "Please call Becky. She calls every day to see if you're back. She's panicking. And by the way, so does Marcy. She also called me and Millie crying because she didn't want to hurt you." Chuck finally sobered up enough to snort with disdain. "Yeah, I'm sure she didn't mean to offend me, just like the last time she decided to go out and do what she wanted. Sometimes it takes a while to learn a lesson, but I learned it." They talked about work. Chuck promised to return on Monday. Billy told him to take his time. He had accrued vacation days. Chuck thought he was going to use his vacation to take Marcy on a cruise. Luckily, he hadn't contacted an agent yet and booked it. "Listen, Billy, this is costing me a lot of money, so I'm going to let you go. If you hear from Becky, tell her I'm fine. I'll try to call her before that and tell her myself. Bye." He hung up and then dialed Becky's apartment number. She didn't answer, but she had an answering machine, so he left a message saying he was fine and would be back in town in a few days. He would call her later. He didn't call home because he had no reason to talk to his wife. This was a problem that needed to be solved soon. Since she had broken their marriage vows, he no longer felt obligated to honor them. One of his thoughts during his drunken days was that he needed sex lessons. He thought for a long time in his alcohol-clouded mind about how to learn these lessons. Finally, he decided that he needed a woman of easy virtue who would be his sex teacher. Now, in the cold light of day, he pondered the question again. Oddly enough, it still seemed reasonable. Who else knows more about sex than a woman of easy virtue? He didn't know where to look for one in the city. He had heard about some street corners in the center of the capital, where women of easy virtue stood. If he could find someone who wasn't sick or addicted to illegal substances, she could become his teacher. He went into the office and paid for a few more days of accommodation. He also apologized to the manager for the state of the room and gave a tip for the staff. This improved the manager's attitude a little. This was not a chain motel, but a family business, and they were struggling with the reputation of being a flophouse. A drunk who vomits all over the place didn't help, but an apology did. Chuck drove to the city center. He went out and started looking at the shop windows. He was looking for women of easy virtue. He wandered for several hours. Since it was daytime, there might not have been many of them. After lunch at a diner, he continued his search. Finally, on one of the corners away from the main business district, next to a more run-down mix of small apartment buildings and businesses, he saw several women standing on the corner waiting. They weren't dressed like in movies and TV, where they wear tight clothes that barely cover the necessary parts. No, these women of all ages were dressed like ordinary people. The only clue that these were women of easy virtue was the way they stood on the corner and talked to passing drivers and passers-by. Chuck watched the women for a few minutes before approaching. One of the girls turned to his 50-year-old face with graying hair. She apparently wasn't too repulsed because she spoke right away. "Hello, sailor. How's the weather?" He smiled at her. She was one of the older women. Her face looked a little stern, as if her life was not easy. It must have been hard since she was here during the day, competing with the younger ones. She had no darkness to hide her age. "You know, the weather is pretty good for this time of year. It could have been much warmer." "So, sailor, why are you in the city?" "Well, I'm actually looking for a teacher now." All the women on the corner were looking at Chuck. The first woman continued the conversation. "Teacher, you say? What kind of teacher are you looking for?" She gestured to everyone standing there. "I don't know of any of us being teachers." Chuck lowered his head in embarrassment. He decided that the truth was the best way. "A week ago, my wife announced to me and everyone present that I was a loser in bed and could not satisfy a woman. I thought about it and decided I needed lessons to fix this. I need a professional who can take the time to guide and teach." She laughed along with the other women. "I assume she gave you permission to do this training so she could benefit later?" Chuck shook his head. "No. In fact, she announced that she had already replaced me in bed. No, I want to do this for myself and for any future partner. So are any of you interested in taking on this job?" The women gathered together and began to whisper. Finally, one of the young girls asked a question. "Where will these lessons be, as you call them?" Chuck replied that he had a car in the downtown parking lot, and they would go to his motel. They conferred again. Finally, one of the other women spoke. "Listen, Trickster, you seem honest, but let's be realistic. It has happened more than once that one of us got into a car and did not return. It's not right to end up on the shore of a lake or to be found in a landfill." "Even if we are women of easy virtue," the first woman who approached Chuck said. "We don't have much, dear, but we have our lives, and we don't want to lose that," she added. Chuck thought about it and understood their reluctance. "Do you have a boss?" he asked. They shook their heads. "No, and we don't want one," one of the girls said, showing Chuck a small pistol while another pulled out a switchblade. "It's to keep them away. We don't work on popular corners so they don't bother us. We pool our money. Someday we'll get out of this business," she explained. The eldest introduced herself as Sylvia. She looked to be at least 50, with dyed hair and fake nails. The youngest was Tiffany, with dark hair and small breasts. The other two introduced themselves as Mandy and Grace. They were around 30 years old. Chuck returned to his original question, "Are you ready to help me, or should I look elsewhere?" They conferred again. Then Sylvia spoke. "I will be the main teacher, and Tiffany will assist. Mandy and Grace will provide security both inside and outside the motel." They discussed fees and settled on $1,000 per night. Chuck added cash to his mental list. They agreed on a meeting time and Chuck went to his car. Since it was Saturday, he needed to find his bank branch quickly. Luckily, he found one on the way to his car. He went inside and asked for cash. While there, he opened a new savings and checking account and transferred most of his money from the old accounts to the new ones. He was afraid that young Casanova, Mr. Andrew Corning, might contact Marcy to give him money. Chuck left her enough to pay the current and next month's bills. Her salary would cover the bills after that. His next stop was a pharmacy. He then ate a light but nutritious lunch. At the appointed time, there was a knock on the motel door. Chuck opened it and greeted the 4 women. Grace went back outside after ensuring there was no one else in the room. She had to watch from their car parked across the lot. She had a gun. Mandy took a chair by the table and pulled out a switchblade. She opened and closed it several times to remind Chuck that they took their safety seriously. Chuck bought a couple of bottles of cheap wine and used plastic cups from the room to pour everyone a drink. He didn't know how to start and said, "So listen, girls, I will be honest with you about everything. I have never seduced a woman. In fact, I've only had sex with one woman in my life. We had just celebrated our silver anniversary when she told me what a bad lover I was. I don't even know how to invite someone to dinner." Sylvia took the lead. "We won't fix it all now. I think we should focus on how to excite a woman and then move on from there. Let's start with you and Tiffany on the couch." Chuck and Tiffany moved to the sofa and sat down. Tiffany, used to sex, looked relaxed, while Chuck seemed ready to jump out of his skin if someone said boo. Sylvia told them what to do, and they worked on it for a while. Tiffany even looked pleased when they separated. Sylvia explained, "Chuck, everyone hopes their partner is so excited beforehand that they are ready to enjoy the first touch. This rarely happens. Look at us. We stand on the corner all day. We think about sex. Clients just want to satisfy themselves. We do whatever we have to, thinking about shopping, our last good sex, our kids, our grandparents, everything to not think about what's going on because it's humiliating and just pays the bills. If any of these guys were good in bed, we might not have a job. Their wives or mistresses wouldn't let them out of their sight if they knew what to do with their bodies," Tiffany added. Chuck lowered his head. It sounded exactly like him. He nodded in agreement. Sylvia raised his head. "You and I are products of our generation. There was no sex education, no easily accessible magazines, no proper protection. We can be forgiven for our ignorance. This young generation can get an education in school. They can buy all the protection products without embarrassment. They have pills for almost 100% protection, but they still don't know how to love." She looked into his eyes. "We can all learn." Chuck lowered his head again. It sounded like him. He nodded in agreement. They taught him many subtleties and tricks of sex. After that, they all sat on the floor, drank wine, and talked. Chuck felt closer to these women than he had ever felt to Marcy. He realized that true love and intimacy is not just sex. It is understanding and respect for each other. After that, they all went to have breakfast together. The women discussed the events of the last 24 hours and concluded that they should become sex therapists. Chuck could only nod and smile at their serious discussions about lifestyle changes. After that, he said goodbye to them and went to check out of the motel. The cleaning lady smiled at him. He didn't know if the smile was because of the tip he left for the staff or because the room was relatively clean. He made one last long-distance call to Becky. This time, she was home. "Dad, when will you come home? Mom is very worried about you. She doesn't remember what happened on the anniversary, but many people explained to her what she said. She loves you and wants you to come back." Chuck snorted into the phone. "Yeah, sure. As for going home, I'm leaving here now and will be in town in a couple of hours, but I'm not going back to the house. This is your mother's house, not mine anymore." I believe she was telling the truth at the party and meant every offensive word. That's what alcohol can do, tell the truth. I'm also sure Andy has come to console her at least once in the last week. Becky was angry with her father. "Dad? She says she never cheated on you and that it was all a mistake. Corning's just a personal trainer at the new gym. My mom joined last month to get in shape." "She didn't tell you about the gym and the membership? Well, that explains a lot. By the way, if he's the personal trainer she met last month, why was he at our party? I don't think he would have made such an impression in a short time, and he wouldn't bother going to a party where he only knew one person." No, I believe she saw him more than for personal training. She was right when she said I was a loser in bed. I think she was looking for someone better and found him. Before Becky could respond, he told her he had to go and that the long-distance bill would be huge. She was still trying to say something when he hung up. He was right. The motel charged a lot for long-distance calls from the room. He paid and left. He had Sylvia's home phone number in his wallet. When he got a new phone, he could call her and arrange to continue his lessons. On the way, he wondered where he should live that night. Since it was Sunday, no real estate agency was open to help him find a place to rent. Tomorrow promised to be a busy day, catching up on a week's work. He really didn't want to stay at the motel for a few more days. It wasn't bad, but it felt awkward to live like this now. Suddenly, he had an idea. They had a motorhome that was self-contained. He could take it out of storage and move it to a campsite or trailer park and hook it up to utilities. He wondered if the campgrounds had electricity he could connect to. In the end, he decided that a trailer park would be better since it would definitely have electricity, water, sewer, and a telephone line. After he picked up the motor home, he found he couldn't rent a spot at the trailer park on Sunday, so he drove to a local campground and parked for the night. He took a taxi back to the storage area to pick up his car. After buying groceries, he returned for the night. The mattress was good, and he had a good night's sleep. In the morning, he woke up, took a shower, shaved, and put on regular clothes to go to work. His plan was to start the workday and then stop by the house to pick up some things while Marcy was at work. He also had other personal matters to attend to, but for now, he needed to get back to work at Chase Construction. When he arrived, Billy called him into the office. "Well, son, that was a very unusual party. Although I've been through something similar, I've never faced it in front of family and friends. Marcy seems very upset. She calls every day trying to find out if I've heard from you. Of course, all last week I honestly said I don't know where you are. You scared me too, my boy. I think of you as a son, and seeing you so knocked out was unsettling. Where did you go, Billy?" "I was really knocked out that first night. I got crazy drunk and walked away. I ended up in the emergency room when the cops and firemen couldn't help me. I sobered up and went to the Capitol." Chuck then explained the past week of drinking and even admitted how bad it was, living, vomiting, and all. He didn't tell his boss how he spent the weekend after he got sober. That was his business. Billy understood completely. He said that when his wife did the same thing to him, he remained drunk for a month. After being arrested for vagrancy, he finally sobered up. The police contacted his wife to see if she could post bail. She did so immediately and then took him away. She took him away for a week to show him how much she had hurt him. It took a long time before he finally forgave her, and he believed that she still hadn't forgiven herself. Her need for a wheelchair and physical assistance kept her from feeling fully forgiven. "I understand, Billy, but your situation was different. You found out about the affair and simply disappeared. The rest of your family and friends were not humiliated by this on one of the most anticipated anniversaries of any relationship. I see no forgiveness for her sin. In the timing of the announcement, it was almost worse than the betrayal of our wedding vows. I think her embarrassment has more to do with the announcement than the betrayal itself. She believes that she deserves her lover and that I should just stand there or turn a blind eye to her actions." "No, it won't be like that. Now I need to get back to work if you don't mind. It's all I have left, and I intend to throw myself into it. It's either work or drink, and I can't drink all day, every day, to try to forget what she did to me." Billy patted him on the back and nodded in agreement. "I understand. You have to do what's right for you. I'm just sorry your family will never be the same after this." Chuck allowed himself one more comment. "I'm starting to come to the conclusion that my family hasn't been together in over 20 years. We stopped communicating on the level we needed to after our son died. I think it just took this long to finally end things. I'm sorry this will affect my relationship with my daughter, but I will do everything I can to minimize the damage." He turned to the door. "After I cancel the cruise, I need a little time to find a lawyer and pick up some things. I don't have a phone right now, so it might be hard to find me." Billy snapped his fingers. "You know, I might have what we need to keep in touch. I rented some pagers a few weeks ago." He rummaged through several small boxes. "Here they are. When I need to contact you, I'll call the number and leave a voicemail. Then you go to a phone and call me back. Here's the number. You do the same if you can't reach me by phone." He gave the piece of paper to Chuck, who put it in his wallet. Chuck spent some time catching up on paperwork, then informed his secretary he was leaving for a while. He headed to a nearby work site to check on the crews. When he arrived at the site, he found everyone sitting idle. When he asked what was going on, one of his oldest crew members, Butch, answered, "Well, boss, we heard you were coming back to work today, and we decided to see if a weakling like you would dare show up. After all, you can't keep your woman happy at home, so you must not be a man. We won't work for weaklings." Chuck's eyes narrowed. "So, you all think I'm a weakling and not a man?" A couple of people nodded, but most turned away. They had all worked for him for many years, with a few exceptions. Butch always challenged his leadership, but usually backed down. Chuck expected him to back down again, but this time he didn't. "In fact, boss, I appointed myself as the foreman here. The men won't work unless I tell them to." "Well, Mr. Foreman, how do you plan to continue working here if I tell you that you're fired? And if the rest of you don't get back to work immediately, what will happen?" Chuck asked. "I don't have to take orders from a weakling, Chucky. I'll work when I decide, not when you want it," Butch replied. Chuck moved closer to Butch. "Now, Butch, we've always had our differences, but we've always found a solution. I'd hate to see you in the unemployment line during these uncertain times. Are you sure you want to keep this up? I only work when I respect my boss. After what we heard from your wife about your abilities in bed, we don't respect a man who can't keep his woman under control." Chuck was already very close to Butch. "So what will get your respect back? Do I need to show you that I can satisfy a woman?" Butch leaned back and laughed. "I don't think anything can bring back my respect. You've proven you're not the man who can force me to do anything. Looks like I have no other choice. You're fired. Get out now before I call security to drag your ass off the premises," Chuck said. Butch laughed and reached out to Chuck. "Why don't you drag my ass out of here yourself?" Chuck knew this would happen. That's why he came so close. Chuck punched him. Then he looked at the others. "When he comes to his senses, tell him that if he apologizes, he will be reinstated. Otherwise, I can do this every day until he understands. Did anyone misunderstand the message?" Every person in the crew nodded. "Then get to work or I will fire you all. Play with me and I will repeat this message. Understood?" Everyone cowered and went back to work. They moved slowly at first, but when they looked back, Chuck was still standing there, watching closely. The work immediately sped up. Chuck looked at Butch and decided to call an ambulance for him. He needed to check on him later. Butch was a good man, just a talker. Chuck visited other sites and only had to threaten dismissal a couple of times before work returned to normal. It was just part of the job now. He headed towards his old home. He needed clothes and toiletries. As he approached the house, he noticed the lawn needed tending. He shrugged. It wasn't his problem now. Marcy's car wasn't there, so he didn't have to deal with her and her lies right now. That would have to wait. He opened the front door, not the garage door. It felt strange after all the years of entering the house through the garage. The house was in disarray. Marcy usually kept everything clean, but now the house looked like a hurricane had hit. There were piles of dishes on the kitchen tables, dirty pots cluttered the stove, and papers and clothes were scattered all over the floor. When he got to the bedroom, he found the same mess. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Chuck didn't check for evidence of Marcy's infidelity in their bed. He assumed she had already brought her lover into the house to give her the pleasure she felt she deserved. He walked to his closet and found his clothes hanging neatly. He grabbed a suitcase from the basement and quickly filled it with enough clothes to last him a while. He included his favorite razor, shampoo, soap, toothbrush, and toothpaste. He carried the full suitcase to the car, then returned to the basement. This was his kingdom. It was as neat as if he had left only yesterday, not a week ago. He searched his gun cabinet and moved all his guns and ammunition into the car. There were tools in the garage, but he didn't need much in the camper. He grabbed a small toolbox with basic tools for quick repairs. Later, he might decide to buy a house and then need more tools. He thought about throwing away everything he couldn't take today so that Mr. Corning couldn't use them. But he hated waste. So he left them. He went back to see if there was anything else he needed in the near future. Finding nothing, he took off his wedding ring and placed it on the chest of drawers in the bedroom. He put it in the change bowl. There were still small coins there from the last time he emptied his pockets before going to bed. His ring didn't look so lonely among the pennies and nickels. He locked the door and headed towards the campsite. On the way, he thought about how to find the gym where Andy worked. Andy Corning needed a lesson about the consequences of sleeping with married women. He also needed to find a more permanent home for the RV, so he stopped at a convenience store and sat down with the phone book looking for trailer parks. He found a few to call and then looked up several gyms that were on a direct route from Marcy's work to her home. He figured she would sign up for a gym on her way home from work. Then, at the other end of the city, he started calling various trailer parks. Several refused RVs in their prime spots, but one had an open spot available. He arranged to move the motor home in the morning. He would need to put blocks under the camper and add some skirting, but that was easy for someone as experienced as him. He also arranged for a telephone line, and electricity, water, and sewer were provided. Then he started calling gyms looking for Mr. Corning. He began with one that specialized in women-only memberships and found Andy on the first call. He made up an excuse saying a friend recommended Andy for personal training. Andy was called to the phone. Chuck used a fake name and relayed some praise, pretending a friend spoke highly of Andy. Andy was so happy that he didn't even ask who recommended him. Chuck agreed to meet Andy at a bar a block from the gym after Andy's shift. Chuck then found the gym and parked so he could see the entrance. He didn't know if employees had a separate entrance, but he didn't care. He was going to deal with Andy either at the bar or in the parking lot. He was curious if Marcy would stop by on her way home from work. As he settled in for a potentially long wait, his pager suddenly beeped. He read the message and went to the payphone outside to call Billy. His boss heard about an incident at the worksite and just wanted to check on Chuck. They talked for a while, then Chuck returned to his car. He didn't have to wait long. Marcy was just leaving and Andy followed her. They stood and talked for a while. Marcy seemed upset and kept shaking her head. Chuck looked at his wife carefully. She seemed to have lost weight. Perhaps the training, both physical and otherwise, was working. But she also looked sad and a little tired. Marcy turned abruptly away from Andy and headed toward her car. Andy went back inside. His shift was supposed to end in 45 minutes. Chuck hoped his meeting with Andy would mess up Marcy's evening plans. Chuck waited, then followed Andy into the bar. As soon as he walked in, he saw Andy looking around, trying to find his potential client. Chuck knew Andy could be a tough opponent since he was in great shape, so he decided to attack quickly. Suddenly, Chuck walked up and hit Andy. He could have gone to jail for assault, but he didn't care. Chuck leaned close to Andy's face. "This is a reminder to stop sleeping with married women, you bastard. Have sex with single women. If a married woman bothers you, tell her to get her husband's permission or break up with him first." Andy nodded. "Do you recognize me, asshole? You need to know who you're dealing with. I'm Marcy's husband." A light came on in Andy's eyes. "She broke up with me. I won't see her anymore." "That just happened today, right?" Chuck guessed. Andy nodded. "I'm guessing you slept with her last week while I was gone." Andy nodded again. "Did my daughter know you were with Marcy all last week?" Andy shrugged. "Listen carefully, motherfucker. The police will be here soon. Tell them it was Marcy's husband who beat you up. They'll find me. I want to go to jail because when I get out, I'll be even angrier. I will find you again and beat you. You'll lie in a ditch trying to breathe and crying in pain. And I'll tell you again to leave married women alone." In the distance, Chuck heard a siren. Someone had finally called 911. He wasn't going to stay until the police arrived. They would have to work hard to find him. He also wanted the police to go to Marcy's place to find him. Maybe then she would think about her safety. Chuck stood up and casually walked away a minute before the first police car arrived. He went back to his car and just sat there for a while, then drove away. He went to the other end of the city and found a payphone. This might be the last time he spoke to any of his family. He needed to know. He called Becky. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Becky. I just wanted you to know that I stopped by the house and picked up some clothes. I'm not going back there. Tell your mother to get her boyfriend to do the yard work. It's the least he can do since he gets sex for free." "Dad, she doesn't see him. It was all a big mistake. She never cheated on you." "Shut up and listen. I just talked to Mr. Corning. He admitted to sleeping with her at our house last week. Now, I know you knew about it. All I want is honesty." "You knew?" "No, it wasn't like that, Dad. He wasn't there before the anniversary party. Just ask Mom. She'll tell you it was all a mistake. She's been crying all week. Becky, you're my daughter and I love you. I will always love you, but I don't like you right now. She's cheating, and you're lying for her. I hope you can live with that. Daddy, please. No, don't hang up. Mom loves you. Yeah, just like when I was in high school. She loved me enough to accept another guy's prom invitation while she was dating me. It was my prom. She had 2 more proms ahead, but she couldn't wait until I left for college. She wanted everything at once and with others, too. She lost friends for a whole year by deceiving me. Now she's proving her love again by having an affair with some bastard to get pleasure. Not once did she try to talk to me about it. Not once did I get any hint of what she wanted from our relationship. I worked hard, built things for her, and did everything to make her happy. But Andy had to sit at the head of the table on our anniversary. Becky cried into the phone, "Please, Dad, it's not that bad. Please understand, Mom." Something alarming stirred in Chuck's mind. Becky continued to beg, "Please come home so Mom can explain. You can get over this and be happy again. You should see it from her side before you make any rash decisions." The anxiety grew stronger. He remained silent, allowing Becky to continue speaking through her tears. "You have to understand it from a woman's point of view. Mom will explain what really happened and she wants to do it. She was unsatisfied." It exploded in his mind like a grenade. "You knew, didn't you? Ever since you came home from college, you've been promoting nonsense about how women have been oppressed for so long and should now become oppressors. You advised your mother to take a lover, didn't you? How can you say you love me when you're stabbing me in the back?" Becky started crying even harder. She didn't deny it. "I raised you, carried you when you were too tired to walk. I carried you on my shoulders so you could see the parades. I changed your diapers when you were a baby. I attended all your events even when you were too busy or too tired. I bought you a car, and I paid for your education. And this is how you repay my love. By advising your mother to have a lover. Don't talk to your father. Don't try to explain your desires. Just go and cheat behind my back. You were never supposed to find out about this. We didn't mean to hurt you. It was never supposed to go like this." Yes, of course, everyone will find out sooner or later. Luckily, everyone found out before I became the laughingstock of the whole town. Once I found out, I had to beat up one of my employees today to get the whole crew back to work. Your feminist nonsense never considers the consequences. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. Me and your mom against the world, with you on our side, against everyone who tries to tear us apart. But no, your nonsense doesn't stink, so you think I'll just swallow it and let it? You play me like a fool. Not a bit of concern for my self-respect or my manhood. Only your female pleasures are important. To hell with the rest of what is needed for a relationship." Becky tried to interrupt his angry speech. "Please, Dad, listen. No, you listen to me. I hope you fall madly in love with some guy and he brings home cheap prostitutes to do it right in front of you, telling you that you are not good enough to satisfy him. Then maybe you will understand what you and your mother did to me. I hope—" He hung up. He couldn't go on any longer. Tears of despair, grief from the loss of his daughter, tears of sadness from a broken family, and simply tears of self-pity flowed down his face. People passing by looked at his face with concern but did not stop to find out why he was so upset. His thoughts were spinning so wildly in his head that he could have walked out onto the road if some guy hadn't grabbed him and turned him back to the sidewalk. The Good Samaritan almost got punched for his efforts, but his "hey, hey, hey" cut through the fog in Chuck's head. Chuck grabbed his savior's hands in gratitude. He nodded, unable to speak, and then let go. He sat down on the sidewalk and let his grief pour out. After a few minutes, he began to gain control and look around. He fought the urge to slip back into an alcoholic stupor and perhaps never return. He needed to forget himself for just a moment. Suddenly, he could understand every person who was addicted to alcohol. Just forgetting himself for a few minutes would be a great relief. But he knew from his experience just a week ago that it wouldn't work. God, it's only been a week and a half since that disastrous anniversary party. It seemed like a lifetime had passed. Every day was full of crap. A patrol policeman approached him and inquired about his condition. Chuck assured him that everything would be fine. When the policeman asked if he had been drinking, Chuck had to laugh. "No, thank God. That would be 10 times worse. My marriage is dead and my daughter helped kill it. That's the whole story. I'm single and will be for a while." He stood up from the sidewalk and brushed off his butt. Chuck looked the cop straight in the eyes. "Yes, everything will be fine, but it will take time." He shook the policeman's hand and headed to his car. He was surprised he wasn't arrested for attacking Andy, but he shrugged. They would find him sooner or later. He wasn't going anywhere. He bought a bottle of bourbon on the way to the camper, but only intended to stare at the amber color as he slowly sipped his only drink of the night. The next morning, he came to work early to get things done before finding a good divorce lawyer. He asked various employees for their opinions on lawyers and found a couple of possibilities. Curiously, even the women did not try to persuade him to forgive and return home. Apparently, his mental wound was more obvious than he thought. He contacted lawyers and made appointments to discuss his case. The first lawyer was a bit strange and full of ideas about equal division of assets. Chuck wasn't impressed. Marcy deserved something, but not half. Not after what she did. He went to the second lawyer and found the right one. She was a woman who had been deceived by her ex-husband, another lawyer, through backroom deals with the judge. He took almost everything from her, even though he was the one caught red-handed. Chuck told her the whole story without leaving out his own shortcomings in sensitivity and sex education. When he got to the point where Marcy announced her affair in front of all the guests, she slammed the table. "We've got her now," Julie said. "We'll take statements from everyone who was there. The judge won't be kind about how you were humiliated in front of people who matter to you." Chuck nodded, recalling how he had to confront Butch to get the crew back to work. "More examples of your wife kicking you when you were down," Julie continued. The final nail in the conversation came when Chuck told Julie about how Becky helped her mother. "What a stupid move," Julie said. "Women shouldn't gain equality by putting men down. We prove ourselves equal by working hard and showing our worth. Things are changing. A few years ago, women had no chance of becoming partners in law firms, but now we're becoming partners faster than men." They discussed the division of assets. Chuck wanted the bulk of his savings and investments. In exchange, Marcy could keep the house. After all, Chuck had built it for her, and it was her design. He also agreed to continue paying Becky's tuition since she was accepted into medical school. There were other conditions Julie didn't see as problematic for the divorce. One was that Chuck would not have to attend meetings where Marcy or Becky would be present. Marcy was served with the divorce papers at her workplace. Julie thought it was appropriate since her colleagues had attended the anniversary party. The message was clear: don't mess with Chuck or face the consequences. The official grounds were infidelity, but the documents also mentioned public humiliation and disrespect. Marcy's colleagues were also subpoenaed to testify about what they knew and when they found out about the affair. Family members received summonses as well, including Billy and his wife. Julie told Chuck that Marcy broke down in tears in front of her boss and co-workers when she read the documents. She never imagined Chuck might file for divorce. Since neither Becky nor Marcy knew Chuck's new address or phone number, they tried to contact him through work. They failed. Billy had given strict instructions to the secretary not to take calls from them. Marcy managed to get through to Chuck once by pretending to be a client. The conversation was brief. Chuck hung up abruptly. Julie reported that Marcy and Becky came to the first meeting with several counter-demands. Marcy burst into tears when offered paperwork to change her last name back to Baines. Becky was also upset when given paperwork to change her last name. Chuck was afraid Becky would refuse, but he wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions. She was no longer his daughter in his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Marcy found a lawyer who immediately filed a motion for family counseling and wanted to change the division of assets. He even tried to claim moral damages since Chuck left without warning and didn't speak to his wife. Julie laughed at this. If the case went to trial, Marcy's lawyer might be reprimanded by the judge. The first trial was the first time Chuck saw Marcy or Becky since the anniversary party. Months had passed. Becky was supposed to be in class but got permission to support her mother. The judge asked questions to each participant. He understood that Marcy was trying to fight the divorce. Her lawyer called her to the stand to tell her side of the story. She claimed she was so happy about the anniversary that she started drinking early, which she had never done before. By that evening, she was drunk. "Judge, I'm ashamed to say that I was almost unconscious from drinking. Why anyone stayed and put up with me, I can't understand. but all of our friends and family stayed. I don't remember what I said when I got up to talk to everyone. I think I passed out right after that. When asked about the affair, Marcy denied it. She said any words she might have uttered were just the ramblings of a drunk person. She loved Chuck and was devastated that he left after 25 years of marriage because of what she said while drunk. It was Julie's turn to ask questions. She started with the alleged affair. Marcy denied it again and suggested Chuck had a nervous breakdown if he believed she was having an affair. Julie smiled at Marcy. "Do you understand the penalty for perjury?" Marcy looked at her lawyer, then nodded. Julie motioned to her assistant at the door. Andy Corning walked in and sat in the back row. Enough time had passed for his wounds to heal, but his nose still looked twisted, and he seemed to have trouble breathing. Julie turned back to Marcy. "Mrs. Newmeyer, I will ask you again about your alleged affair with Andy Corning. Did you have an affair that began before your anniversary party and continued until your husband returned to town? If you do not answer truthfully, I will call Mr. Corning to the stand." Marcy lowered her head and nodded. "For the record," Julie said, "record that Mrs. Newmeyer nodded her head in agreement with the question." The judge spoke. "Mrs. Newmeyer, I want to know why you started an affair and why you tried to hide it from everyone when it is already known. I read the statements from the party guests. They all agree that you declared your husband could not satisfy you and that Mr. Corning should have been at the head of the table instead of your husband. Somehow you believe you have the right to break your marriage vows without consequences, and your lawyer seems determined to punish your husband, who has done nothing but be a good husband and father," the judge said, looking over his glasses. "If I could, I would have you locked up for attempted perjury and kicked out of my courtroom, but I can't do that." He glanced at Marcy's lawyer. "Given the guilty plea regarding the affair, do you want to amend your counter-motion?" The lawyer nodded. Chuck thought Marcy was spinning her own web of excuses, trying to make him believe her version of events. The judge cleared his throat and ordered Marcy to return to the table next to Becky and her lawyer. Julie smiled at Chuck and whispered, "I think we win, but he may still order counseling." The judge addressed Chuck directly. "Sir, I understand that your wife has hurt you badly, but worse things have happened in marriages and they have survived. Do you see any path to forgiveness? I am seriously considering marriage counseling." Chuck stood up. "Your Honor, I have tried to find a way to forgive, but this is not the first time my wife has done something like this. The first time was when we dated in school. Since we grew up together and I am a couple of years older, I was always assigned as her protector and friend in elementary school. We started dating in middle school and continued dating in high school. We were not sexually intimate as it was not accepted at that time, but we planned to give each other our virginity after my prom. A few weeks before graduation, Marcy announced that she was going with someone else. She was also going to give her most personal gift to this other person instead of me, the person she supposedly loved. She wanted everything at once, to date me but do what she wanted with others, and she expected me to accept it. Because she was younger, she would have had other opportunities to go to prom, but because of her selfishness, she decided she wanted this prom." Chuck stopped to catch his breath. "We didn't date for 2 years while I was in junior college. I only came home for the holidays and refused to be in the same room as her on most visits, even though our families were close. When I returned after college, I decided she had probably matured, and we started dating again and then got married. During all these years, she never expressed her disappointment in our sexual relationship. I will say this again. There was never a time when she expressed disappointment in my sexual skills or lack of knowledge. I had no idea what she was feeling until that night, when alcohol allowed her to finally express her contempt for me. Because I couldn't satisfy her, she felt entitled to seek satisfaction elsewhere. I later learned that this feeling of entitlement was a direct result of conversations with my ex-daughter, Rebecca Newmeyer, who encouraged Marcy's behavior and believed that I would never know. I also believe that they both sincerely thought that if I found out, I would remain silent and let it continue. Your Honor, I believe that the lack of trust in my ability to accept criticism about my shortcomings, the lack of faith that I would try to change, and the lack of respect from my wife and my estranged daughter make it impossible for me to consider forgiveness now or in the future. I can't even think about being in the same room as them, except that I had to be here today to give my side of the story. As soon as your gavel hits, I'll be the first to leave the room, sir." The judge nodded. I understand, sir. I have sat in this place for many years. I have seen both hurt husbands and wives stand before me. Some were able to restore their marriages, but most were destroyed by the thoughtless actions of their spouses. I am also very sad that this happened for all of you. He stopped and looked at the documents. I see that you, Mr. Neumeier, are asking that your wife revert to her maiden name. She has not signed the papers, and I cannot order it. I also notice that you are asking your daughter to legally change her last name to Baines, your wife's maiden name. Since you explained why, I understand your request. Again, I can't legally force someone to change their name. Sometimes I wish I could. Your lawyer will also advise you to change your will and make sure that all life insurance policies have different beneficiaries. Since you cannot change their names, you can make sure they do not benefit from your death. He leafed through the papers again. I see no reason to delay this despite your wishes. Mrs. Neumeier, I am granting your husband's request for a divorce. Unless he files another petition 120 days from today, this divorce will become final. I am granting his division of assets. I'm sure the house has appreciated significantly since it was built, so you can sell it for a profit at any time. I see no reason why you should benefit from your mistake. Despite what your lawyer says, I advise you to choose wisely next time, or you'll end up in court again. He looked at Rebecca. You haven't said a word today, but I hope you understand what you started when you encouraged your mother to break her marriage vows. The fact that you both didn't respect Mr. Neumeier and didn't try to communicate your wants and needs is concerning. I cannot legislate from this place, so the only ones who will suffer are you. You must live with the consequences of your actions. So I advise you both to stop next time and take a deep breath before you make such decisions. Do better next time. The judge's gavel struck, and Chuck was finally free. He left the room first, not intending to speak to any of them again. He had an appointment to continue his sessions with his favorite teachers. This was already the fourth meeting. He didn't know what the theme would be this time, but each previous one had been a discovery and an education. Some classes were challenging, but he made an effort to understand their goals. Marcy began dating and eventually remarried. That marriage didn't last more than 2 years because her new husband couldn't stand being compared to Chuck. Somehow, Chuck became a saint in Marcy's eyes, and the new husband couldn't measure up. Even though he satisfied her sexually, Marcy began to stalk Chuck. Although stalking wasn't a popular term then, she kept an eye on him and tried to intercept him in random situations. It didn't work in the end. She even threatened several of Chuck's girlfriends, but with limited success. While his girlfriends might decide to leave, Chuck had no intention of returning to Marcy. He loved her once but didn't anymore, and that was an obstacle she couldn't overcome. Rebecca used her father's money to complete her education. She then saved up the same amount and tried to return it to him. Chuck remained firm in his decision not to acknowledge her again. Rebecca eventually started a foundation to help with marriage counseling and became a strong advocate for it. Chuck's prayer and wish came true for Rebecca. She met another doctor in medical school and they married soon after. She thought their marriage was as good as her parents had been before their anniversary. Apparently that was the case until one day, her husband came home with a nurse and told Rebecca to leave, closing the door behind her when she wouldn't leave voluntarily. As for Mr. Andy Corning, he didn't learn his lesson the first time. His crooked nose continued to attract women. He finally learned his lesson when his next girlfriend's husband came home early and found Andy showing his wife new sexual positions as a workout. The husband went to prison, but Andy had to live with a catheter because his dignity was damaged in the fight. Some might say it was a well-deserved punishment. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.